Good morning, everybody. My name is Ralph Stewart. I'm the founder and managing director of Lifetime Retirement Income. Thank you for joining us this morning and compliments of the season. It's the 1st of December tomorrow and it's come around so fast. In fact, my two teenage children, Sophie and Harry, were home from university yesterday and we put the Christmas tree up. And just observing two young teenagers trying to put up a tree that we bought at Briscoe's was a really exciting and fascinating experience. At times, I thought the tree was going to be upside down, which is, I guess, what Christmas is all about. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. We're really lucky today. Jane Wrightson's joining us. I suspect that Jane's probably one of the busiest women in New Zealand. So having Jane with us today is a real treat. So thank you, Jane. Just before we start, let me share with you Jane's CV. It's an amazing piece of work, Jane, and a credit to you. It all began in Hastings.
That's the best bit.
Jane has a Bachelor of Arts from Victoria University, has an MBA from Massey University, over a decade in programming and TV New Zealand, was Chief Censor between 1991 and 1994, Deputy Chief Executive of New Zealand On Air, Chief Executive of the Screen Production and Development Association, Chief Executive of the Broadcasting Authority, then 12 years as Chief Executive of New Zealand On Air. And while doing all of that, finding time to support the community, both serving on the boards of Netball New Zealand and Swimming New Zealand. Jane, I'd be very proud of that if I was you.
It's very kind. Thank you very much. It's been fun and it's not finished yet.
Really pleased to hear that. Jane, if you're okay, we've just got a number of questions we'll just talk through. Our aim in the next sort of half an hour to 45 minutes is just to kind of try and give the people listening today a sense for the importance of your office, the things you're trying to achieve, and amongst the many things you do, in particular, your role as Retirement Commissioner.
Superb.
Right. Let's start off then. And as always, everyone who's watching and listening, please send questions through if you want them to come up, and we'll answer those towards the end. I'll just go through the couple now to get us started. Jane, your role is very diverse. You lead the national strategy for financial capability for Kiwis of all ages. You monitor retirement village legislation at the same time. You administer the retirement village disputes process, and you review the government's retirement income policies. That's an awful lot going on. Can you just explain to us how all of these things come together in your office and how they interplay with each other?
That's a really good question. And I think the answer is some of those jobs, they're a little bit random when you think about them and describe it like that, which was one of the first jobs I had to do coming in here, was to try and devise a kind of coherent strategy for what my office might do. We're only 35 people and how we might do it. And obviously the core focus around all of this for me has always been retirement. Our vision is everyone retires with confidence. I think the office in the last few years has focused an awful lot on financial capability, which is fine, but there are other things we need to do. And the retirement lens, of course, is in many ways the hardest, because everybody doesn't really want to think about it much unless you're incredibly organised throughout your life. And so the point of offices like mine, I think, is twofold. One is to try and keep the government honest, because our job is to advocate for a sensible long-term policy approach, which is not always, easy. And the other is to help people think more long-term, which, as everybody in this industry knows, is one of the greatest challenges and one of the greatest rewards when they see people doing it well.
Yeah, no, indeed. Can I ask, Jane, we observe from a financial services perspective that so much attention is placed on the journey to getting to retirement, and so little emphasis is placed on retirement itself. And there's, almost 600,000 retired people in New Zealand today who deserve our attention.
Well, that's right. And it was kind of interesting to me, because when I took the job up, people from my old life would go, "Oh, it's great, you're going to be an advocate for us oldies." And I went, "I suppose I am. Yep, jolly good." The office wasn't doing that at all. That was quite interesting. So the office was completely focused on the journey to retirement and the financial capability side of it. And again, that's fine. But I think what happened over that kind of 20 years since we were invented, maybe it's 30, can't remember, 1993, is that there was nobody doing this, that particularly the FinCap side of the work at the beginning, really much, and certainly nobody coherently, and nobody doing it without trying to sell something, which is why, of course, the cleverness that was sorted was invented. By the time I rock up many years later, I was really surprised at how crowded the marketplace was. Every person and their dog is thinking about this from a business perspective. The banks, the insurance people, the financial advisors, the financial services people, everybody's got a kind of FinCap hat on at the moment. And I thought, what's our role here? I think when you're running a government organisation, it's really important that you complement the market and fill gaps that the market won't fill, good gaps that the market won't fill, not silly gaps that the market won't fill, but good gaps, and provide kind of trusted information, which I think is part of our job on this. So when I started to look at the National Strategy for Financial Capability, which then was focused on the team of 5 million, if you like.
Yes.
For a start, I thought that's too wide. My office of 35 people can't be doing that. We've got other things to do as well. And we don't have a direct customer contact like all the other businesses in this space.
Yes.
It seemed to me after a bit of thinking around here that our job should be a coordination one and a collaboration one, so that if we can get people in the sector to have a common view about what good financial capability looks like, have a common lexicon, a common language, which is one of our projects at the moment, and have a coordinated approach, then we'll all be better off. It's the 2 + 2 = 5 synergy, So a whole bunch of small, totally individual business focused actions are okay, I guess. But probably each of those organisations, I reckon, is wasting money and wasting effort because we're not sharing information and we're not sharing research and we're not seeing where the real gaps are. So that's where the new version of the NatStrat came from, really, which is about trying to unite the industry in terms of how it delivers financial capability services, whether they're doing it in the not-for-profit space or the government space or the for-profit space.
Yeah, I understand, Jane. Understand. I mean, would we be right in suggesting the team of 5 million, you can't avoid COVID in modern discussion these days. It creeps in everywhere. That's led to what appears to be considerably increased cooperation across the government department sector, the government sector. It appears to be able to use that to forward financial capability at the same time.
I think that's right. I mean, I was 3 weeks into my new job with the first national lockdown, and it was fascinating to see what happened. And again, new to me, not new to the people watching this webinar, I suspect, but the level of panic we saw was astonishing to me. We think we're in uncertain times now, but we were incredibly uncertain times in the first national lockdown, and that was obviously manifested in the number of inquiries around KiwiSaver withdrawals, for instance.
Yes.
So it became quite obvious to me and a number of others in government. The first thing we needed to do was get on the phones together and figure out what the common messaging was, and then keep rolling it out. And so government and industry worked really well in that space. The old "don't panic" message, really.
Yes.
And the "when do you need the money" message. And none of that was clear to me when I started because I was so new. But it's also the thing around financial capability messaging is that it's quite easy to be consistent because the core planks are the same, aren't they? So yes, COVID has provided enormous challenges and also, I say, enormous opportunities, as all good crises do.
Yeah, no, good, thank you. So sometimes you have a sandwich or a lunch or something. I think the industry in retirement needs to do a lot better. It needs to learn from you. We are disparate, and there is so much information we could share. Classic example is New Zealand Society of Actuaries, I think, published some really good information about how to assess your income in retirement, but it's not linked to any practical delivery.
Well, not quite true, because that group inside there was led by Alison O'Connell, who's a member of my expert advisory group. And we've been talking at the EAG level about decumulation for a little while. It was also was muttered about on the last review of retirement income policies, but that was all. And nobody quite knew where to start. And in fact, it was going to be, and still will be, I think, a bit of a focus of the new RRIP, which will be coming out shortly. So that's the Society's contribution to the thinking, and it's a brilliant bedrock, isn't it? It's a really clearly explained paper on what you could do if you felt like it. And it's the first one I've seen like that, so it's superb. And from there, you can start building on policy platforms and business platforms and the rest of it.
I disagree a little. I think it's brilliant theory, and it's the right theory. But asking an 80-year-old to assess changes in their PIR, what likely future returns might be, and what their mortality is a big ask.
Oh, maybe. But again, it's not written for the 80-year-old, really, is it? It's written for people in the sector going, here's what would be a good approach to think about, and how might we think about rolling that out?
Yes, again, I think it is for retired people. The primary delivery is a fair income in retirement, not savings for retirement again. Good discussion. And good segue too. Can we kind of put a bit of a lens on financial capability that is specifically retirement? The challenges of, when you're in retirement, a savings shortfall is hard to make up. It's not really an option because you're already there. NZ Super is fantastic. However, it contributes to a lifestyle that's different for everyone, but it's a pretty basic start. We often, the notion of health insurance is getting really hard and is unaffordable. In your 70s, it's a tough ride, and there's no obvious answer to that. What are your thoughts in terms of financial capability with specific reference to retirement?
Do you mean, well, two parts, on the road to retirement and within retirement. So on the road to retirement, it's BAU, isn't it?
Well, I generally mean in retirement.
In retirement.
Forgive me.
Okay, so you mean for current pensioners and near pensioners?
Yes.
Okay. At this point, as far as we can assess, a reasonable majority of pensioners are reasonably financially capable. The people coming up behind them, not so much, which is why the work on the pre-retirement road is so important. We have a cohort, it's getting towards we're in the middle of the baby boom retirement period, right? So, and if you take away the very rich and the very poor, because they tend to skew arguments, and you look at the lump in the middle, if you like, which is most of us, most people are sort of okay, because they've built up an asset, they've been a benefit of free education if they've gone down that route, they've been a benefit of massive changes in the housing market, they'll be, and again, don't forget, we're not talking about the very rich or the very poor, they'll have a good capital base in terms of their house, they probably won't have enough in the lump sum category, probably, and that becomes an issue, particularly around the decumulation happening. But largely speaking, they'll be all right. And in all of our research during COVID, the pensioners were the people who were the least affected, because they have, if you like, the only version of a universal basic income we have in this country, which is NZ Super. And NZ Super, as you say, is a baseline income. It's a taonga. And I'm very intent on protecting and preserving that, because it's the mark of a civilised society that is the minimum requirement that we would have for older New Zealanders. The kind of lifestyle you want beyond the minimum is, as we know, up to you. It's only a two-tier system here. It's private savings and New Zealand Super. So I think the issue is really not the financial capability of pensioners plus, it is the financial capability of maybe 40 plus that we need to be quite focused on. For young people, they've got all the well-known issues, and their driver, frankly, should be trying to get onto the housing ladder. We all know that. It's how you start. But the 40 plus, there's so little good and consistent information about what you do when you've got maybe 20 years of working life left. And in that 40 plus period, you've got probably a high mortgage, you may well have expensive children, you may well have had one or more of your first life shocks, business failure, health crisis, leaky home, whatever the hell it is, will go wrong at some point, because it does. That's life for you. And so the way we can keep providing careful and consistent information along that, always start with don't panic and then go and here are your various options. And that, of course, is where sorted is kind of the base point. And what I'd like to do with sorted is make sure that we provide all the basic information you need, but we can't provide financial advice, obviously. And we get much clearer in saying, and these are the kinds of people you need to go and see for your own individual circumstances.
Good.
And this is where I think the financial advice sector in particular has got a challenge and an opportunity. I'm hearing, a lot of complaints about the new regulatory regime, some of which may be right. I've got no views on that. But I'm not hearing the opportunities that I think are very obvious now for people who have maybe 10, 15, 20 years working life left, maybe who are recently retired with a lump sum. I'm not hearing consistently good information about who to go to, for why, what are the services offered, and here's a range of people you might look at. And that requires a sector, that sector to get its act together, I think, in terms of consistent, coherent and unbiased information. And all of them at that point say, oh yes, but we're only small businesses. And at that point, because I come from the screen sector full of small businesses, I go, you might be a small business, but you're going to stay small, but that's how you think.
Can I just ask you, in terms of the time you have in the day and all the various things you're doing, hear quite clearly about the importance of the runway to retirement, sort of the 40 to 65, what needs to be done, and articulated really well. How much time and effort do you have to spend those people that are off the runway and are aged 65 to 80 and need help?
To date, until a couple of months ago, the answer was whenever I needed to, and most of the thinking and work was around villages, because most pensioners are kind of okay. Again, if you chop out the bottom and top 10%, most are doing okay compared to, say, other types of New Zealanders, some of whom are absolutely not. The people who aren't doing okay or are doing less well are, of course, women, Māori, Pacifica, and that's generally speaking where my head will move. But in the last couple of months, I've become really embroiled in the problems that pensioners overseas have had when the travel bubble closed. And so I'm learning very quickly about the processes MSD uses to allocate the pension, or indeed stop it, or indeed demand repayment, which is all quite new to me. And I've got people overseas who are in serious trouble and who are not being treated well by the system. So I'm getting interested in that space. So what does all this mean? I think the Commissioner's job is to look for the trouble spots and see if there's anything that can be done. And this, to me, is a trouble spot.
Good. Helpful. Not sure it's a trouble spot, but a good segue. We hear a lot of noise and a lot of traffic around the retirement village space. It's part of your remit. Albeit it's a relatively small part of the retirement scene in New Zealand.
Well, it was.
Even still, less than 15% of all Kiwis aged 75 plus. That leaves, 85.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Well, again, that was a relatively small part of my portfolio until I started to think. And what I saw within 3 months of me getting there were two quite intractable arguments going on, with neither side listening to each other very well. And I had a bunch of residents and residents representatives saying there's something wrong in the state of Denmark. And I had the operators going, nothing to see here, nothing to see here, everybody's happy. So completely conflicting views and no real mechanism to solve it. So I thought about this a lot because both of them were kind of right and kind of wrong, as is always the case when people are debating. Which is why I decided to do commission a white paper internally to go, let's just put all this out in a document and go, we think this is what the sector looks like. We think these are the issues that are being debated with no clear pathway for resolution. What do you think of that? My goal was to make it short and in plain English. I didn't quite manage that. It's longer than I would have liked, and the plain English is as good as we could have managed, but it's a complicated area. And we took feedback on that, and I was amazed, vigorous, passionate, sometimes very aggressive debate from both sides. And I'm going, oh, this really is not good. And so then we put recommendations to the government, and the government has agreed to review the legislative framework, which is what I quite quickly concluded needed to happen. You can do a few things by working parties, and we still might.
Yes.
You can do a few things by changing the code, which is a tortuous process. There's clearly problems in the complaints resolution space, which is very difficult. It's layered. It lawyers up far too quickly. And I have had experience in the disputes resolution space, so I kind of saw that and went, oh, this is a bit old-fashioned. And people get very passionate about it, you know. So I'm hoping that review will kick off next year. Meantime, I'm continuing to talk to both the residents and the RVA to say, what is it we could do collectively, which would involve both of you taking a step back and both of you maybe changing positions. And that, as they say, is a conversation in progress.
Encouraging.
But it's important, as you say, 14-15% live in villages. The projections are that it's going to increase mightily. Clearly, the sector thinks it will, because you know every other week you read about another village takeover or another village being commissioned to be built. So it's a growth area. And the legislative framework around it was developed in the late 80s, early 90s. It's very industry focused, which is of its time. And that's okay. Industry's needs need to be reflected in legislation. Of course they do. But it's always a balancing act between the needs of the industry and the needs of the consumer. And the consumer side is not as mature as it could be. And that, I think, is a good focus for rethinking the space.
Good and helpful. A little like you, we can see the projections for the growth in the retirement village industry in New Zealand, and it is significant, I agree with you. But we would put forward that the majority of New Zealanders in retirement are still going to live out their retirement in their own home. How do you think that group of people has a voice?
Well, we're looking at that quite hard at the moment. And again, that may well be a theme coming through in the next retirement income policy review, because, you know, if any issue has catapulted itself alongside COVID, it's housing, isn't it? And it concerned me at the beginning that the conversation was all around the plight of the first home buyer. And as I said elsewhere quite recently, I'm not underestimating that at all. I've got a 26-year-old daughter who's not feeling remotely comfortable at the moment that she can buy a house at the same age as me, because she just won't be able to. So we know that's an issue. But there's an issue at the other end as well, which I think will emerge over the next 10 years or so, which is the plans of the people currently in their own home, which is the common one, to downsize, release some capital and move into a smaller place. And the fact is, they're not being built. And the other end of the spectrum, the really poor people would have expected to get on the pension, finally get a regular income, maybe the first one they've had ever or for a while, and see out their days in a comfortable council flat. And that's not happening either. So, you know, you can see there's an impending problem here, and there's some really good thinking going on with the likes of people like Sam, thinking about Sam Stubbs, thinking about build to rent, the kind of European model that we all talk about and haven't seen here, because there aren't enough incentives, and the demand would have been questionable. But you can see the demand's going to increase, can't you? So it seems to me it's a terrific business opportunity. Is it easy? No. Is it a multi-year problem? Yes. Is it anybody's fault? Successive governments, I think. No one government's got this right. And the problem started more than 20 years ago, and everybody has kind of dodged it ever since. And now the pigeons are the chickens, as I say, coming home to roost.
I understand. What do you think? If a large chunk of the retired community are going to be in their homes until they move out or pass on, the home equity release market is starting to grow quickly, and recognise that fact. Yeah. Do you have a view on retired people releasing equity while living in their homes to support their retirement income?
I think on balance, it's one of a series of options. I don't think it's either good or bad. What I like to see is options for people that they can choose from. And if I, for instance, in particular, if I was childless and had a property worth quite a lot and I was cash poor, it's an excellent option. If I had children, I would want to be clear that I would have spoken about it with them first, I think, because, you know, it's a polite thing to do. And I've heard of a number of children who have said, for heaven's sake, do it. You know, we're okay. Don't be the martyr and sit on all your cash and starve yourself and don't pay your power bill for us. It's ridiculous. So, you know, good conversations within whānau are really important here. And the more kind of industry models and schemes that turn up that could say, on a range of opportunity. Here's something you could do to make your post-work life better. It's great.
The notion you hear in government sometimes of pathways, I think it really applies in the retirement sector. There are many.
Yeah.
And they all need to be equally represented.
Yeah, I mean, this is why decumulation is such an interesting thing. And again, being new to the sector, I had to look the word up. And then I just applied it to myself, as you often do, your focus group of one. And I said, this is absolutely true. All my life, I've been thinking about how to save my money, and not done very well with that, but how to put the money in the bank or put the money in investments and do all that stuff. But I've absolutely no idea what to do when I've got my KiwiSaver lump sum, when I stop work. I've got no idea how to do that. And I will, of course, have enough nous and skills to go and find out my own personal path. But all of us in this sector, and me and mine with Sorted, have got now an opportunity and a bit of an obligation to go, here are the things you should be thinking about. Because for a whole generation of us coming up, we've never had to think about it. And we, of course, are the generation that may well live into our 90s, if not longer. Whereas our parents did not always have that luxury. And of course, this is a cohort issue too, because, I'm sorry, I'm doing a segue here, but an interesting fact around the pension age is that the Māori Pacifica rate of receiving the pension is extraordinarily low. Why? Partly because it's a younger population, but partly because we know they die before 65. So it's only a problem for a number of cohorts, not everybody.
So, I mean, exactly as you point out, one of the big sort of moving parts in retirement space is obviously, and I don't like to use the word mortality so much, it's kind of a negative term, sort of not a lifespan, but a health span. And, the changes in mortality and morbidity statistics are changing so fast. And just the notion of an improvement in mortality through time, someone who's 70 who gets to 80 has a completely different lifespan at 80 than they did at 70. It's complicated.
Well, it is. And that's why I get cross when they talk about New Zealand super and they start banging on about how expensive it is. And I've got a whole set of views on that. But they go, oh, the easy option is just put the age up. And I say, for many people in their 60s, this may be the first time they've actually been able to chunk away some cash. With a bit of luck, they've paid off their mortgage. With a bit of luck, their kids have left home. With a bit of luck, whatever life crisis they've dealt with has kind of solved itself. And it's their time to appreciate some cash or some capital. And NZ Super should be a baseline for that. So that if you're having one of those conversations that says, oh, I'll put the age up, that's the easiest thing to do, it's the most fair. Well, it's not fair on women, it's not fair on Māori, and it's not fair on Pacifica. And we have to think about that. What might be fairer, if we want the fair solution to any problem around the cost of New Zealand super, would of course be means testing. And that's a hell of a hot potato, as we know.
You're very brave to raise that.
Well, I raise it and I smile and I go, before you make any changes to pension settings, you have to look at the range of options.
Would you agree? I almost see it as scaremongering. The notion of the sustainability of NZ Super for the next 2 decades is really not an issue. And it gives a lot of people...
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's the job of people like Treasury and some of the black-hatted economists to go, here's an impending mountain of debt doom. Yep, got that. Exactly. If you think about it in terms of its connection with GDP, the latest Treasury forecasts say something like the pension might rise to 7.5% of GDP. That's terrible. And I go, is it? Is 7.5% of GDP a bad number when you're talking about 25% of the population? It may not be. So again, thinking about things with a more nuanced, contextual way is the hard thing to do around here, but the most important thing, I think.
But it creates a lot of unnecessary grief.
Yeah. I speak to young people who say, oh, the pension won't be here by the time I get there, so I don't care. And I have quite a visceral response to that. Going, number one, any government starts talking about that and vote them out. Just do it. That you've got power here. It's not the mark of a civilised society that you wouldn't provide for your older people, just as you want to provide for your young people. You need to provide for your older people at the end or towards the end of their economic working life. And there is no reason for this to be the case. The pension's been around since 1930 mumble, and I can't imagine a country that would not have it. The question is what the settings are, and those are the things that people need to think about.
Completely, and totally ignoring the benefits of KiwiSaver. It improves the sustainability of a support system. It doesn't reduce it.
Well, I guess that's right. And because people go, oh, there won't be a pension because the KiwiSaver will take over. And I'm going, nonsense. We have a 2-tier retirement income framework in this country, not 3. We don't have compulsory workplace saving schemes, which is the 3rd tier, as most of you know.
Yes.
There's a bit of a missing gap here, but never mind. So we've only got 2. It's quite fragile. The government contribution to the well-being of older folk is New Zealand Super. And the private savings part of it is, in effect, as you know, what you need to sustain the lifestyle that you want. And that seems to me to be fair. So government doesn't exit the space any more than the need for you to, if you possibly can, save little and long over your working life to top up your retirement well-being. It's a perfectly sound system.
Completely, Jane. Completely. Very good segue. The last retirement income policy document we read, and we submitted it several times over the last decade to it. And it's a useful exercise, I believe that. But just at a structural level, when we read the latest that's been published, there are 18 recommendations, and 12 of those are for KiwiSaver alone. 2 questions, really. One, is 18 too much? And why such a focus on pre-retirement?
Oh, it's funny you're raising that, because the new terms of reference for the 2022 review will be out any minute now, I think, this week or next week. And I've done quite a lot of thinking about that. I had nothing to do with the 2019 report, because I thought, I was appointed just before it was published. They asked if I wanted to be involved with it. I thought for a second. The younger Jane would have said absolutely and dove in. The older Jane was far too smart for that and said absolutely not. There's nothing I can add value to at the moment. It is what it is. And the office has done a remarkable job in pulling it together in the time when they were under considerable distress themselves. So there it is. Is 18 recs too many? Probably. The goal I have for the 2022 review is that we want to make it focused. I kind of want to move the discussion, again, going back to what we were talking about before, I kind of want to move the discussion around NZ Super from expenditure to value. I'm just a bit sick of reading all the stuff that says older people are a burden on our society. Well, I'm going, bollocks, we are. Most of us are doing quite a lot already, and we're no burden, thank you, and we contribute. So it'll be around shifting the language around NZ Super, I hope, and it'll be around building resilience for a better retirement, I hope. So this year's one will have more of a focus on retirement issues, I hope. And we'll do a little bit of work on KiwiSaver, but as a result of the last review and various other things, MB is currently leading some cross-agency work on KiwiSaver settings, and that's good. So I don't really have to go there. And that's fine. We can focus more on general policy. So we'll look at general policy and housing, I think. We will look at KiwiSaver probably in terms with a decumulation lens, I think, as much as anything else, and looking at the settings and seeing if there's any improvements we should be making to those. I particularly want to spend a bit of time thinking about new initiatives to encourage people to save in what is a very complex post-COVID environment. And to do that, I'm going to have to engage the industry, So what fresh thinking can we muster now in the absence of compulsion to tell people that saving is a good idea? Easy to say, incredibly hard to do. So what new initiatives could we look at? I think there's an opportunity here. And we'll look at New Zealand Super in terms of income adequacy. And that'll largely focus, I think, on people who may be renting. That's a big one. And I also probably have a little look at the recent change to Super around the impact of the recent residency change, climbing up to 20 years. which came in quite quickly.
Yes.
I don't think there's been any work done on what that actually means. And what I'll probably also do, I hope, is that obviously there are research projects that move around this this review. What we haven't heard for a little while is the voices of older New Zealanders. And I'm going to try and see if we can get a research project kicked off, a qual research. There's lots and lots of quant, but some qual research that goes, what's it like being an older New Zealand at the moment? What does your life look like? What are your stressors? What are your joys? And that, I think, will start painting a picture, which is a whole lot better when you're thinking about things like, I don't know, NZ super settings, you know, or even KiwiSaver settings. This is what somebody looks like at 70, for instance, who's done no saving. That might be quite powerful to a 30-something person. You know, I don't know. We'll see.
All right, Jane, if we can thank you on behalf of some of the listeners, I think the notion of giving a voice to middle, older retirement sector is just fabulous. Much needed, and we'll be grateful.
I think so. There'll be intelligent ones, not necessarily the ones that moan and groan all the time.
We also, it's a bit contentious, but the Massey University report that comes out every year and has a go at working out how people spend in retirement. It's only a guess, but it's pretty consistent in saying NZ Super is the base level and there's a top up from there, as we've talked about before. There is still a lot of New Zealanders who suffer to make that top up. They just can't get there. Any interest in considering the tax aspects for the retired community?
Oh, that's a hard
I know.
That was mean. Probably not. I mean, again, when I came in to this gig, the world had not changed. And the world really changed. So a couple of ideas I had about improving things, which would cost the taxpayer quite a lot, I pretty much binned, because it's, you know, it's about luck and timing, isn't it?
Yep.
So I will defer to my tax expert colleagues on that one. I don't have any burning issues at the moment, but maybe some will emerge over our research period, and maybe some will emerge over the next year. I'm willing to listen, sure, but I'm quite a practical creature, and I've absolutely no wish to tilt at windmills that says, here's this fabulous idea, it's only going to cost $3 billion. And I'm going to go, I can't get that through, don't be silly, you know.
No, very, very fair. Make the observation, because the PI framework we do have now, so it's relatively easy to implement, which we haven't had in the past. Having said that, the cost of NZ Super weighed against further tax concessions, I appreciate as a challenge.
Yeah.
Clearly hear that.
I mean, I'm glad I'm not the Minister of Finance, put it that way.
It's, in terms of the policy, the 22 policy coming up and up, hearing your passion and energy and forethought is exciting. How do we get some confidence that, having read so many of those over the last decade and some really good ideas coming through, you know, genuine people trying to help, where does that go next? Who actually holds the pen on this? Is it the Minister? Is it MIMBI? Is it a selection of ministries? Where does it go next to get a result?
Well, MB is my monitoring ministry, as you know. What we've done this year, because I've stood up a very small policy wing inside the organisation. I was fascinated, by the way. This is my favourite sort of lunchtime story. In my first couple of weeks, I got a call from a reasonably distressed older person having trouble with MSD and the pension and going, I just need some advice, what do I do? And I put my head up in my open plan office and said, who does pensions around here? And they all went, we're marketers, we don't do pensions. What are you talking about? I went, oh dear. So it was important to me quite quickly that we stood up a very small policy function that understood this, and most specifically understood Wellington, because the office was entirely based in Auckland for different reasons, and we'd lost all our connections to very important people in the wider public sector that can help us get things done. And people in the public sector, while people like to, private sector people like to slag them off, are incredibly busy doing very complex work, and it's hard to get their attention because they're working at, especially now, considerable speed on really gnarly problems, right? So my policy director has been charged with re-establishing those connections. We've stood up a little retirement income policy officials group who we will use as a kind of stress test through the period of the review, and go, if we made this recommendation for, say, MSD, A, we want to know that MSD is interested, and B, we want to know that MSD could do it if they wanted to, and C, we'd want to know that MSD would be delighted to do that if. And those conversations have to happen before you put recommendations up. So again, when you get to the end of the review, I'm hoping that we'll have a smaller number of recs, all of which have a work stream, or most of which have a work stream with somebody out there in the wider public sector who has agreed to say, I will pick this up and run with it. I hope that's the plan. It might not work.
It's a plan. It's a plan.
It's a plan.
Can we encourage you when it comes to assessing the decumulation metrics, and in particular the calculations with your reference groups that you have available to you? Just bear in mind matching the theory with the practical delivery is a key consideration for retired people, who I do think are a group of people who get things done. And sometimes just joining up the get done with the theory gets a little lost.
That's right. And again, there are no magic bullets to this, but I think what I lack in terms of, 30 years experience in this sector, I bring a very fresh eye that says, why can't we do that? Why don't we do that? Should we do that? And it's quite good having somebody asking the dumb questions, because it just refocuses people. And if I hear we could do it and it's a good idea, and we haven't done it because, then obviously that gives you a bit of an action plan. If I hear that's the dumbest idea in the world, it won't work, and this is why, I might challenge that, or I might go, okay. And mostly I like to have, people in a room that say, if we could lift up for a second, and if we could agree on, say, 3 things to do that were doable, what would they be? That's quite powerful. And, somebody like me who has no views much about rights and wrongs other than ethical ones, I hope I can help.
I do suspect what you deem to be your dumb questions are actually recognising opportunities, and people see that. I think we're getting close to our time now. I'm just going to go and check to see if there's any internet questions. Thank you. We have one, Jane.
Probably a hard one.
Apparently, we mentioned an article on decumulation in the last sort of half an hour or so. I don't remember that. The viewer's asking, what was that document?
It's the New Zealand Society of Actuaries. We Te Ara Ahonga Ora, we've shared it on our LinkedIn page. And if somebody wants to contact me, I'll send them the link anyway. But if you go to Te Ara Ahonga Ora, which is our name, the Retirement Commission, we shared it on LinkedIn last week. It's good.
It is. I read that. It's a good document. It does need to link theory and practice, but it's fundamentally good theory, though.
I think you start off with a good theory.
Indeed.
And you work on how to implement it. That's right. But without the good theory, and I think some of the mistakes that people in sectors make, you go, here's a good idea, we'll run with it.
Yes.
The low-hanging fruit argument. And that's okay, as long as it fits within a broader strategy of what you want to do. If it's just you running after every piece of low-hanging fruit without a kind of underpinning policy or strategy, then that way lies madness.
Completely when it's about someone's savings. Very dangerous space. Jane, I think we're going to end here. Can't thank you enough. I know how important your time is, how busy you are. We are very grateful on behalf of everyone who's been listening today and the guys at Lifetime Retirement Income. We are very grateful to you. Thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I hope my little ramblings have been of some entertainment for you.
Quite so. I hope we're going to get you back. We've enjoyed it. Exciting. Thank you, Jane.
You're welcome. See you. Ka kite.
Oh, that's